So, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar on Understanding Market-Based Approaches in Clean Cooking Solutions in Displacement Setting. My name is Ransha Basnet, and today I'll be your moderator for this webinar. As you know, this webinar is organized jointly by GIZ, UNHCR, MEX, NDEF, and Unitar GPA, and is part of an ongoing webinar series. So last year we kicked off our webinar series where we talked about different aspects of clean cooking solutions. A summary on that is coming up. And in this season, we are going to dive deeper into the market aspect of clean cooking and really talking about why market-based approach. That's the webinar for today. And on 20th October, which is the second webinar in this series, we are going to dive deeper and talk about what are the demand and the supply side interventions to support the market. So we hope you'll also join us for the second webinar on 28th October. And my call at this webinar today is actually recorded, and the presentation from this webinar and the last webinars are available on Energypedia. And my colleague will also drop the link in the chat to this webinar as well as to register for the next webinar. So you can access all the important links in the chat. So with the chat, that's my cue for the second thing, the housekeeping rules for today. So today we are accepting all of your questions. So if you are using your computer, on the right side, there is this control box. There you have a section called questions and chat. So please use that to send us your questions, and please do tell us to whom the question is addressed to. For example, speaker one, presentation one, so on, so that at the end, when we have the Q&A round, we'll assign it to the respective speaker. And in case you are logging in with a mobile device, instead of this box, you will have a Q mark on your device. It's like a question mark. Just click on that, and then you should be able to send us the chat. In case you don't see the control panel, for some of you, maybe there is an orange. So where my arrow is, there is like an orange arrow. So that's where you should just click on, so the whole control box will appear. So please do send us your questions, and we are looking forward to receiving many of them. So a quick look at agenda for today. So today we have a stellar lineup of speakers covering a whole wide spectrum of market-based approach. So we're going to start with a quick summary of what we just talked about in our last webinar season. And then we are going to dive deeper into what is market with a presentation from Chatham House. And then we are going to travel to our colleagues in Uganda and Germany who are going to talk about the different kinds of assessments with also an example from Uganda. And then we are going to travel to our colleagues from UNHCR, who is then going to give us a presentation about why our cash-based intervention for clean cooking. So stay tuned for all those amazing presentations. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first presenter for today, Ivana Visakha, who is currently working as an independent consultant as well as a research fellow. So Ivana, if you could give us a short summary of what are the important things what we talked about last webinar series, that would be great. And over to you.
Thanks a lot, Vanisha. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see, hopefully, many of you who have tuned in to our previous webinars again. So yeah, without further ado, I'm just going to give you a quick recap of what we discussed in our previous webinars. So first of all, we started with landscaping. So what did we look at? If we could move to the next slide. What are some of the main challenges that we identified? So first of all, prioritizing energy for cooking in displacement settings. This is not necessarily something that is always considered, and certainly there's more to be done by different stakeholders, and I'll come back to that. Energy access is a mandate for UNHCR in particular. It's a matter of protection. It's no longer a choice. It's something that has to be done to ensure that the displaced get the kind of necessary protection in all different circumstances, and energy access is one of those factors. Innovative finance, how do we move beyond grants and grants only? And here we consider different options and really kind of try to discuss how we can learn from the energy sector at large and really bring it into displacement settings, which have been sort of marginal to that discussion, but now more and more so receiving the kind of attention and really having that consideration built in. What models, what delivery models can we move towards? So again, how do we move beyond free distribution, and how do we ensure that the technologies that already exist reach the displaced in a way that is affordable, accessible, that suits their needs? And finally, policies. How do we kind of build policies that are more inclusive? And again, here it's a matter of making sure that the displaced can benefit from the kind of policies and financing mechanisms that also other members of the host communities, for example, can benefit from. So some of the kind of overarching issues were moving away from short-term fixes to long-term solutions, and also moving from cookstoves only to cooking systems. We heard from a range of stakeholders, and they all do amazing work in this space from all different kinds of angles, from building partnerships to capacity building to informing policies, etc. But we did have some of the kind of key conclusions that we came up with: that no one-fits-all solution exists, that we have to avoid market distortions, particularly when it comes to free distribution. We have to be smart about it. We have to create ownership of energy access among the stakeholders who are involved, and really have leaders who take that on. Improve policies, as I just mentioned, promote local integration, and also build better partnerships and really boost that kind of communication and interagency cooperation. Next, we looked at cooking systems, and here we didn't necessarily look at the whole range of them, but we focus at 6 key ones, which is firewood, processed biomass such as pellets and briquettes, LPG or cooking gas, biogas, ethanol, and electricity. When talking about those, we really wanted to make sure that we don't just look at the technology itself, but also the kind of associated services and the role of the end users in kind of providing inputs and really trying to move towards kind of co-creation and co-design of those solutions. And we looked at applicability, availability of those, affordability, health and safety aspects as well as their impact on the environment. And the product of this is a beautiful matrix that you can access on the Energypedia website. And I really strongly encourage you to go and take a look and really kind of get a kind of better overview of these different cooking systems. I'm not going to dive into this, but I do direct you to check it out. And finally, we also looked at delivery models. And here it's important to appreciate that there's a whole spectrum of those. And also no one way of sort of categorizing them. So Vernisha, if you could move to the next slide, there we go. So from donor-led to market-based approaches to finally services that are provided predominantly by the public sector. And under that, we also see a lot of the kind of public-private partnerships being built. We dived in more into the kind of donor-led and market-based delivery models, and today you'll be hearing much more about the latter as well. And finally, when it comes to free distribution, of course, that's predominantly sort of donor-led and grant-based and very common in emergency response. So particularly at the onset of an emergency, there's very little choice but to provide something as soon as possible. Market-based approach, on the other hand, take a much more kind of long-term view. And we've seen that there is a move towards that, particularly in protracted crisis situations. And cash-based interventions fall under that market-based approach and provide either cash transfers or cash vouchers to the displaced so that they can make their own decisions about what energy solutions and cooking systems fit their needs the best. And again, market-based approaches and cash-based interventions is something that you're going to be hearing much more about today. So this is a quick sprint through the previous 3 webinars. Thank you very much. And also, I do strongly recommend that you check out the State of the Humanitarian Energy Sector report, which is now out and really gives a brilliant overview of the state of that sector today. Thank you, and over to you, Ranisha.
Thank you so much, Ivona. I know it was a sprint, and I'm pretty sure our audience are wondering, where can I find all the information that Ivona talked about? Just check your chat box. My colleague has just dropped you a couple of links. In one of those links, you should be able to find all the different webinars that we did last season. And for each webinar, we have also a output, whether that can be a summary sheet or like the metrics that we talked about, a recording, a presentation. So you really have a chance to go through all the materials. So moving forward, today we are talking about market-based. So we want to hear from you, the audience, if you have been involved in a market-based assessment yourself. So I'm going to launch a poll question in your chat. So please do take the voting and do tell us if you have been involved in any assessments related to market-based approaches. Yes, no, and if yes, please use the chat box to tell us what was experience or challenges or anything you want to share about it. We are really looking forward to hearing from you all. So I'm going to leave the chat for another 10 more seconds so that everybody can vote. In the meantime, I can see that we have almost 100 attendees who have joined us. So for everyone, welcome again. So maybe another last 10 more seconds. So if you haven't voted, please do vote and do let us know. So now I'm gonna, so another last, let's say last 2 seconds for final votings. And I'm gonna now close it and show the poll results. So we have almost a neck-to-neck competition between yes and no. So we hope both who have already done a market-based approach and who are looking to do it or haven't done it yet, this webinar will be interesting for both of you. And hope we have a lot of information covering both of you that both of you require. So thank you, dear audience, one more time for taking part in our poll. And with that, I would like to kickstart with our first presenter for today. And I would like to invite Owen Graffam, who is Assistant Director for Environment and Society Program for Chatham House and has many years of experience in this sector. So Owen, if you could, perfect. We have your camera on and I have your presentation on. So over to you.
Thank you, Renisha. Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Owen Graffam. I'm the Assistant Director of the Environment and Society Program at Chatham House. I've been working on the subject for eight years now, and thinking about market-based solutions for most of that time. And Renisha's asked me to reflect on my experiences over the years and to think about three questions. So, what is a market-based approach as it relates to clean cooking? Two, why do we need to think about them? And three, how do you set one up? So I guess if we could go to the next slide, Renisha, as Ivona has already outlined, these things are never completely black and white. And obviously Ivona's already outlined this, but most procure and provide delivery models all have a market component anyway. For example, when big humanitarian organizations issue an RFP for a given technology, they do so to a market. And conversely, almost all of the projects that I've looked at that we think of as market-led generally have a strong element of granting. I mean, we're dealing with very vulnerable populations who have low amounts of cash and income. So these things are not quite as straightforward as a black and white comparison. So some of the success factors for developing a market-based intervention, generally we think about kind of the maturity of the local market, the stability of the setting, the presence of different stakeholders, and how much support and buy-in they're going to give to an intervention. If we could go on, Renisha, and maybe if you could skip to the next slide first, please, just one more. There we go. Yeah. So, but on the flip side of that, in terms of the market constraints, these are some of the things that I just kind of brainstormed and came up with. I mean, permanence of the setting, we all know in a humanitarian environment, this is not guaranteed. Some of my work in Burkina Faso, the camp in the north of Burkina Faso was closed due to jihadist threat back in 2018. Also, some of Practical Action's recent work in Rwanda in the Gihembe refugee camp was closed and on the basis of government decisions. So permanence cannot be guaranteed. Location of the setting, generally kind of far-flung refugee camps a long way from capital cities and increases the costs for everybody. Population size, I mean, a large part of what I've spent a long time doing is making the case for the kind of bounded nature of refugee settings and the fact that refugees are often in a kind of small enclosed market. But actually many refugee settings are quite sparsely populated, and we have to take account for that too. Of course, all the usual things about restrictions on freedom of movement, restrictions on the freedom of work, and limited cash in the local economy. These things are all crucial, and generally where we've seen energy interventions work best, these things, we've had more freedom of movement and more freedom of work and more cash. But even when you have those things, there's often still a very thin local economy. So not so many businesses working in this space, and how you develop those businesses is one of the key questions that I hope we tackle today. Finally, just on the end here, I just noted the kind of dominance of local economies by certain groups. It's something I haven't seen a great deal of research on, but obviously in the kind of cooking world, particularly kind of firewood trade is dominated by kind of the internal dynamics around certain population groups and has sustained local economies in many ways. So this is a really tricky area for us to break into many times when we're thinking about putting a market-led approach on top of that. Okay, Renisha, if we could go back one, sorry. Yes, there we go, perfect. Thank you for reading my mind. Yeah, I've tried to lay out a slide here. I've adapted it from some of Katie Whitehouse's work, but which just kind of tries to give a bit of a matrix for different types of market intervention. And there's obviously a ton of areas where you could develop market interventions around clean cooking. This one that I've pulled out here has kind of four main components. So you could think about reform of market policies, you could think about access on the demand side, you could think about services and infrastructures, and you could also think about availability on the supply side, basically. And yeah, it kind of goes without saying that in each of these areas you can accommodate kind of very shallow market interventions, or you can accommodate very deep interventions, and all of these can be performed by different players. So in the examples I've pulled out there, cash distribution would be an example of using markets that already exist, and that's generally performed by another player in the humanitarian system. That's generally a kind of WFP or UNHCR, I guess, and it's not normally the kind of lead NGO who would do that. Supporting vendors to receive digital payments, that would be a kind of example of how to support markets and make them more ready and improve their readiness. And then an overall market system change might be something like a kind of behavioral change intervention that supports households to understand why a shift in cooking practices might be useful and productive. And yeah, and that would equate to the kind of market system change side of things. So obviously you can kind of do that on each element of this matrix, but I thought it was worth just highlighting these different components. Next, Renisha. Yes, so why do we need to think about market-based solutions? I mean, Ivona has already touched on this, but I'm going to give you three very quick, but I think very important reasons. So firstly, the status quo isn't working. Renisha, if we could go forward. So the overall trajectory of access to clean cooking is getting worse. I've talked about this many times, so I don't want to bore people who are very familiar, but although we're seeing more interventions, we're also seeing huge numbers of displaced people, and the numbers increasing, and we're not keeping pace with that displacement, so the overall access levels are getting worse. And as you can see from this slide, wood fuel use is as endemic as ever, and it's basically we're not doing enough. We're not changing the status quo. Secondly, Renisha, if we go forward, I guess all of the research that I've been involved in has shown that there is market potential that can be uncovered and unleashed. And these charts here show the energy expenditure from Kakuma 1 refugee camp in Kenya and Gadubu refugee camp in Burkina Faso. And I guess it's, the basic point is it's clear that money is changing hands, and it's clear that a large proportion of expenditure is going towards energy. And I think the point I'd make here is that obviously, I'm sitting here in the UK and we're having huge political debates at the moment about cost of living crisis and otherwise. But when I did a little bit of Googling about an hour ago, I saw that the percentage of my household income that is likely to go towards energy bills is going to be about 11% in the current kind of Ukraine crisis. And what Corbyn and Vianello found back in 2018 was that refugee households were spending between 15 and 20% of their household incomes on energy. And that was pre-crisis. That's completely unremarkable in the perspective of a refugee livelihood. And I just think it's an interesting comparison with what we're seeing at the moment. Thirdly, Renisha, if we go on, I guess perhaps most difficultly, I think we also all have to acknowledge the limitations of the procure and provide model. So in this slide, I've shown pictures of the Cox's Bazar camp in Bangladesh, and I'm a really huge fan of what has been achieved there. So essentially, UNHCR and a range of other organizations are paying for the procurement and distribution of LPG to the population. And this has had really brilliant impacts on health, wealth, the environment. And yeah, those two pictures there are kind of before and after intervention shot. But I've seen a lot of discussion recently as gas prices have increased of whether the intervention will have to be wound up or scaled down or adjusted. And I guess even if we manage to keep it alive, which I think we should all be fighting to do, it seems highly unlikely that the experiment's going to be replicated or scaled up in other countries at the moment. I think essentially what I'm saying is we need to have a range of options going on, and we need to keep working for market interventions on top of this type of thing. So that's really my what and why, Renisha. I guess, the last thing you asked me to reflect on was how do you set one up? Well, I guess I should flag that I'm probably the worst person to ask this, since I'm just a researcher and very rarely get my hands dirty actually doing the good stuff. But I guess just quickly to flag two examples from previous work within the Moving Energy Initiative. And I'll leave you guys to go into this in more detail on your own, really. But I guess I think these two examples are instructive because they provide very different approaches, and hopefully the speakers will kind of give us more detail about how these differences might be interpreted. But one example is the work that Practical Action did in Gadugu refugee camp in Burkina Faso between 2015 and 2019. The camp was located about 15 kilometers away from the nearest town, Dori, and a lot of the interventions there focused on identifying what already existed in Dori and thought about how to promote and incentivize businesses to expand their operations into the camp location. So they organized show and tells with local businesses, they did trade fairs, they helped with marketing information, they helped microfinance institutions support and expand, they helped train people, agents and technicians. And I guess they did a lot of that kind of crucial networking between the humanitarian community and the business community. So yeah, that intervention was very much focused on the kind of market system and how to improve that system and how it could be sustained in the long run. My second example is work that Energy for Impact did in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, and here the Energy for Impact have proposed a solution. They haven't managed to implement it, but essentially the idea would be of a fuel concession that would subsidize the price of a cooking solution and bring that in line with what residents are already paying, and then support that over a number of years. And this is obviously going to cost a lot of money, but the idea is to kind of transition away from the current scenario to a situation where residents are able to pay in a more sustainable way over time. And I won't say any more than that because I think I'm really running out of time here. But yeah, if you need any more details, I've put a lot of examples on the next slide, so please do. Oh, I've forgotten this one. I should just say, in both of these examples, I think really this is one of my main points, that any market-based intervention in a humanitarian setting has to acknowledge the fact that there are segments of population, and there is a segment of the population which is able to pay for solutions and yeah, is able to engage in a kind of market mechanism. But as I've said a couple of times already, we are dealing with very vulnerable people and people with incredibly low and no income, and any kind of market-based intervention, which is really, I think, can kind of earn its salt over the years, also needs to have consideration on vulnerability and inclusivity, and yeah, think about offering an opportunity to the private sector over the long term, and think about the deeper market potential of the setting rather than focusing on pure wins in the first instance. So that's all I'll say, Renisha. I'll leave a last slide up just with some other examples and yeah, drawing attention to some of the cool things that have happened. And I think I should flag also that yeah, I just released a paper just this morning on kind of policy environment, which details a few of these examples in more detail as well. So I'll put that into the chat later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Owen, and congratulations on the paper and especially joining us from the conference. So now that we heard from Owen about how do we go about setting the market, or why market for that matter, I would now like to move on to our two colleagues from GIZ ESTS, Natalie, who is working as energy advisor for ESTS and has been working in the clean cooking sector for many years, and which of his 6 years was spent in Ethiopia. And we have Samuel, who is also working as energy advisor for GIZ Uganda and ESTS program, and he also has over 12 years of experience in developing markets. So now I would like to pass over to you, Natalie, so that you could tell us about what are the different assessments that we would need to do and why those are important for setting up a market. So I'm just gonna send you a request. So if you could accept it, and we can then proceed with the presentation.
Yes, I hope you can see my presentation now.
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, so thank you very much, Ranisha, and welcome also from my side, and hello to everyone. I have the pleasure here now to speak about the assessment needs when you do market-based approach, but I'm not an expert on assessments, so you're not going to get now the complete manual on what you have to do to start a market-based approach. And also, as Owen has already said, it is a very complex environment we are moving in, so the solutions are also not always so easy. So allow me to just show you this slide. I'm not going to go into detail. I just wanted to quickly talk about the project Energy Solutions for Displacement Settings, which is under the program of supporting UNHCR in the implementation of the Global Compact on Refugees. And we are focusing for the past 3 years on developing and implementing energy access through market-based approach in close partnership with UNHCR and also implementing partners of UNHCR. And we are working in Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia. So all examples I'm going to speak about are basically focusing on these 3 countries. Please visit also our portal on Energypedia for more information. You'll find a number of articles there, interesting stories, pictures, and yeah, all this key data also of our successes. Yeah, so the question is, why do we need assessments? Of course, assessments are always very important to understand the situation, but it is not the more assessments, the better. So we really have to also use our resources wisely and choose what assessments we need. And one important thing that I would recommend to every practitioner here is when you plan assessments, then yeah, be very well aware about the objectives and the aim. And define specific and targeted aims beforehand. Yeah, the assessment only helps you when it is well conducted and very well focused on that. And one other important thing which we sometimes lack also in that space is that data and results, of course, also always need to become available and accessible for others. Otherwise, we assess the same thing over and over again, and yeah, we're not coming to the implementation then. So yeah, once you have decided that you want to leave the conventional humanitarian path, your assessment will look quite different from the traditional needs assessment in the humanitarian space. And yeah, the main need is that you have to understand the socioeconomic situation of the community and also the market. So I'm not again giving you the silver bullet solution here, but I would generally recommend to look into 2 areas of assessment. So one is, yeah, as I said, you have to understand the conditions that the community is in. And here we speak about the refugee and the host community. That is very important. Yeah, you may do an assessment where you find out generally about the demographic, the income of people, employment, access to finance, education, etc., and willingness to pay on certain products, baseline of energy access, etc. And the methodology you may follow is, of course, desktop research. Check always what has already been done and not redo it. and household service, I think, are very necessary when you speak about community, but you may also use other methodologies here. And then the second thing, which is quite crucial, is that you have to do a market assessment. So market assessments usually have the aim that you understand the need and demand for a product or a service. So traditionally, market assessments is something that that companies do before they enter a market to understand whether their product or service really has a chance to survive or how they have to change that. So you may also consider here that the best to undertake this assessment could be a private company, as they may have more experience there. Yeah, however, I would like to take this opportunity now from my own experience or also my colleagues' experience, to give a little bit of highlights of yeah, also let's call it the golden rules of assessment, but it is yeah, kind of some observation of where you have to be very careful. As Owen already rightfully said, we are talking here about people in crisis, people who are usually very poor and who are fighting for their existence. That's something to be considered, and there are some other yeah, specific things that you need to consider when doing assessments in displacement settings. One, especially on markets, is we are moving here in very fast-changing environments and very quick growing markets. So do your assessment timely before intervention. It doesn't make sense to do an assessment and then years after you have the finance for that, because then the assessment is already expired, you can no longer use the data, and you need to redo it again. As an engineer in chemistry, I also learned that the biggest source of error is always the sampling. So here you have to make sure that you have to have professional enumerators who are doing the survey, especially when it comes to household interviews and focal group discussions. What I personally experience is many times that people in crisis, people who have lived in refugee settlements for many, many years, know the answers to the questions and are also sometimes answering strategically and not to the point. For example, if you are stopping by with a white Land Cruiser and just getting out of it and say, I'm from a humanitarian aid organization, you may not always get the right answer, especially when it comes to questions regarding income or yeah, access to finance. And then one important aspect is also that assessments always raise expectations. So when you do assessment, be sure that you can also meet some of these expectations and communicate also very well on what you are going to do and what you're not going to do, also to the people who are kind enough to answer your questions. Yeah, and as I said, always know your objective and the specific aims of your assessments. And also communicate it very well to partners. You may otherwise also upset partners if they don't know exactly what you're doing here. We did a number of studies and assessments within ESCS over the past 2 years. So these assessments are not thorough market assessments or yeah, they are not like in-depth surveys as such. Which is also due to the fact that we had a pandemic in the past 2 years. So household interviews, etc., was quite challenging. But the kind of studies that we did, which I will just run quickly through, you can read them in depth on Energypedia. So those studies are contain more of like conceptual development around market-based approaches and recommendations for the project itself, but also for partners. And it looks at like how different stakeholders could work together in developing markets actually for energy and find sustainable and long-term solutions. So those assessments are generally informing about feasibility and approaches that you could choose. And as I already said, they are a bit focused on like the 3 countries, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Uganda, that we're working in. So one of the first study we did, because in cooking energy, yeah, the general impression I can say is that what the market is lacking here is money. People are not having access to money, and they may not also take cooking energy as their priority as long as you can find firewood for free. in the forest. So this study is on end-user finance and payment systems, the objective of it was defined as to do stock taking and conceptual development to improve the access for end-user finance and also the access for payment systems in displacement settings. So the major conclusion here was that end-user finance is extremely valuable to increase the demand and therefore also the market choice that you have in terms of cooking energy and other energy products, that it could be targeted to specific groups easily. But the constraint here is for sure that end-user finance only work where you have already a market existing, and that it can boost that market. You can find all the study. There's a general global study, but also 2 country-specific studies on end-user finance on Energypedias. You find the links in the chat. A second complementary study we did at the same time is to look then at humanitarian finance. So humanitarian finance in terms of cash or voucher assistance, etc., that Ivona has already talked about it before. How can this humanitarian finance actually boost and improve the market-based energy to access? And on the second objective here was how is the regulatory framework for refugees in particular to actually access different financial services? So there has been like very specific recommendations for our 3 country contexts, and like 5 key forms of humanitarian finance have been identified that can actually support the market-based access to energy. So I think one important finding of this study is also that humanitarian and development approaches need to collaborate closely together to actually develop markets. So then one other important point that we're always looking on is livelihood, because of course for having good customers are those who also earn money and have money to spend. So that's part of the market. And therefore we have also looked in like what is the access to finance for those who are doing what we call productive use of energy, or those who are doing their livelihoods out of energy. So here the objective was to assess that on the ground, what the needs for finance is and how these livelihoods can also improve market-based energy in displacement settings. And then it was also a brochure was developed which can be used for the communities, which identifies like what value chain gives which job opportunity and which market opportunity. Major conclusions here is that it's very vital to create conditions for refugees to actually access the labor market, and also the enforcement of these laws that refugees have access to bank accounts, etc. And different market maturity for different products always are really depending on that, like whether this is going to be a good livelihood opportunity or not. And more about that you find in the study. And then another study I would like to highlight on is a study on the potential on biomass cooking fuel production. So GIZ has been famous for their work in improved cook stoves, but especially in displacement context, it becomes very obvious that work on fuel is also needed. It is quite challenging to access any alternative like electricity or LPG. Not impossible, but also quite challenging. You may also see the discussions in our previous webinars. So we are focused here on biomass, and the objective of this study is to identify the most viable, safe and reliable and sustainable biomass cooking fuel, which can consider local value chains. And then minimize, of course, like the exploitation of natural resources. So one of the major conclusions was that wood fuel will always be a dominant source of cooking energy, and we may also work on boosting or supporting the sustainability of wood fuel supply and production. And alternatives are also required, and while electricity and LPG may not in every context be working, we can also look on different biomass-based options such as briquettes. However, there's an in-depth calculation about the business case, and the production and promotion of briquettes will require large subsidies, so it is more definitely of a protection task than really a viable business. But yeah, when speaking about the humanitarian development space in displacement settings, then all these efforts, these different sources of finance can also be combined together to make a business approach or a sustainable approach, which is financed and subsidized, but which also has like a chance to continue beyond humanitarian and development support. So thank you very much for your your attention. Sorry, yeah, if you have any questions, I'm really looking forward to that. Back to you, Ranisha.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And before we move on to Samuel, I want to quickly highlight that if you are looking for any guiding documents, like how could a household survey for clean cooking look like, in the documentation page for the webinar, we have also list publications with resources that you can have a look and explore. So I encourage you to have a look on that. And now I'm going to send a request to Samuel so that he can present his case study and then give us a case study from Uganda. So over to you, Samuel. Samuel, you have muted yourself.
Yes, can you see me now? Yes, thank
Perfect.
you, Ranisa. Yes, good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are joining from. Thank you. My name is Samuel, and greetings from Arua, western part and northwestern part of Uganda. Yeah, just like picking from what Natalie has clearly elaborated, I would like to take you through a case study that we undertook for gathering evidence for market-based approaches in refugee settlements in relation to clean cooking energy. We undertook this case study. We had 2 case studies, most specific. I'm going to explain 2. One which is about what we call energy access in refugees, creating evidence for market-based approaches, which you can also find in Energypedia. And also we have the state of sustainable household energy access in refugee settlements. All these were precursor to our interventions in market-based approaches in Rhino Camp and the Mvepi refugee settlements. Well, maybe as a background, I would just like to let you know that mostly when we are doing market-based approaches, this is limited by data on existing energy ecosystems, which actually is very important. And the studies we undertook, we needed to, for the objectives of this study, one, we wanted to understand the socioeconomic factors which could likely influence the access to sustainable energy, as well as we also wanted to understand the knowledge, attitude, and practices for cooking within these settlements. In Uganda, our refugee settlements are not like what we call camps, but for our case here, the settlements, in these settlements, people are free to move, the refugees are free to move, they are free to work, and as well as also they have other sources of getting income through doing livelihoods. So it's an open area where people cannot be restricted, unlike in other camps, maybe in Kakuma and other places there. So at the time of conducting this study, Uganda had actually, at that time, Uganda was hosting 1.3 million refugees. But as I speak right now, the number has gone to 1.5. Imagine the pressure that the population exerts on the finite resources, especially the energy resources in these settlements, on top of the population that the host also present in these areas here. So, well, one thing that was very important was to understand the demand and also supply dynamics that could either facilitate or maybe impede the interventions that we had planned to do in our project ESDS, as well as also ENDEV. In these 2 sites, Rhino Camp and the Mvepi refugee settlements, the research found out that there were about 120,000 refugees in the Mvepi and in the Rhino Camp, and also 57,000 refugees respectively in this. Mainly these refugees come from DRC and South Sudan. Well, the method that was used in this assessment was both quantitative and qualitative. I will also take you through why we felt that the data, how important this data really helped us in our program, especially the market-based approaches that I will be talking about in the next slides here. So overall, the study looked at both the qualitative and the quantitative, looking at the households, surveys, group discussions, special focus group discussions, as well as also we also needed to look at the dynamics. Who are those engaged in the energy ecosystem, especially from the side of the vendors. So this information that we obtained was able to help us to design the models that later on the ESDS project also implemented. The most important, I think, data that we looked at was the general demographics. In these two settlements, the report indicated that the two settlements had different dynamics, especially Rhino Camp had reported that about 60% of the refugees lived longer, and this you'll later see that it had implication on the approaches that would do, because those that had stayed longer were able to be integrated into the local socioeconomic life with the ability to earn income through involvements in livelihood. Unlike in other places that refugees who are slightly newer in the area prior to the study, they had no other sources of getting income other than sale of the leaf items. So the study also looked at the composition of the household heads, which actually had also an impact on who makes the decision on what to spend. So generally in these two settlements, we found out that the majority of the households had more female than male. It had impact on our design of the models that we would later implement. Generally, in host community, the population homogeneous. They had both women and men. So overall, Rhino Camp and the MVP, Rhino Camp settlement was slightly mature settlement than MVP. So all the interventions that market-based approaches that we tried to pilot and also scale are very well fitted in this data that we got. And also the average size, it's very important that when you are doing this kind of assessments, you also have to look at the average size of these households, because definitely at the end of the day, it will also influence the type of technologies and also the size of technologies that could either be bought or be adopted easily depending on the situation in these settlements. So we also looked at the research indicated that many of those refugees who had stayed beyond 2 to 5 years, their income, the source of income was through sale of agricultural produce. So because in Uganda, these settlements, the refugees are given at least 30 by 30 meter land where they can farm easily. And also we looked at some of the petty trade business, such as Baba soaps, phone charging, video, and also sale of cooked food, as well as sale of wood fuel in both settlements. In some other places, since the refugees are allowed to work here, some of them also had their source of income through sale of their labor. Yeah, so basically, the source of income clearly indicated that what technologies could be promoted, and whether these households or the SMEs will be able to pay for them. But the underlying thing when you're looking at collecting data on source of income, there's some bit of limitation, because it also depends on who are those interviewers who are interviewing these people. From my experience, we have seen that the refugees that's down there, what happens is, in most cases, they try to be on sympathy end, whereby giving information on where they get their source of income is also limited. I think when you're carrying out this kind of baseline assessment, you need to have concrete and well-experienced maybe researchers or research assistants who get this. Most preferably, would prefer if you can integrate the locals around there who know the situation in the settlement to have this data collected. Otherwise, getting people from ASA to go and collect this information may easily have a misleading effect, because this category of people tend not to be open to provide information. So the cooking technologies that were mostly found there are the 3 stone. Of course, looking at the time they had spent and also household, it was inevitable for them to only use maybe one cooking technology. Many of them had to have both the three stone open fire and also another, either whether it's improved mud, which actually you can see here in the last corner photo. That's the type of data that were present at the time of conducting this survey. So this survey data really provided us with the evidence that probably when you are introducing a market-based approach or technologies through market-based approach, you need to also understand the dynamics involving the cultural bit of these people or the livelihoods, and if at all you can see here, we also saw that even the improved mud stove, they had the knowledge to develop this and they were able to use it. So this one helped us to come up with prevention of DLAB, which was implemented by Kolika. Since the participants were able to participate, there was a participator bit of approach, and they really wanted to go with what they wanted. So majority of the households had more than two stoves. So as you can see here, 70% of the households used 3 stone open fire. So this information fitted very well in our RBF approach, which let me explain in the next slide here. So one major thing that we found out down there through this research was there were shops for energy services and products, only shops, small shops that offer phone charging and printing services or maybe solar products existed. So the recommendation in this report was that we needed to scale up, and that's how the energy kiosk model was born. I will explain how this model worked and how it is being used as epicenter of energy access in these refugee settlements. So one report also indicated that generally there was low purchasing power on the side of refugees because their disposable income was very low, and it really presented some bit of limitation on the range of the products that could be provided through market-based approaches. So like Natalie explained, the end user finance study also clearly indicated that, and we, as ESDS, we are also trying to do piloting the demand subsidy, which is ongoing, and the lessons will also be shared with other stakeholders as well. Generally, the usage of improved charcoal and wood stove is low in communities because the technology were present at that time of study. Basically, were just those that used firewood, and the stoves that were there were either through procure and they provide by UNHCR or through implementing partners. But again, also if you read the detailed report, the knowledge on usage of these the technologies was not really adequate. As such, many of the households tried to use the 3 stone. So, how important have these data been programmed? Well, we have used this data for our energy kiosk model, where, as you can see in the photo, this is the energy kiosk I'm talking about. It has a range of activities and have been taken here through both through sale of products and also energy services. And our RBF scheme models have also fitted to strengthen the market linkages here. Result-based financing, we have also used the data that we obtained there to undertake the intervention of RBF. Both this RBF we tried was basically for a supply side subsidy. Here we looked at the incremental cost in the last mile distribution of these products there. So vendor systems have been developed through the data we got, because in the report we realized that there were no vendors for easy access of these products. Even those SMEs that worked on restaurants, they were using MUD or the least improved MUD kind of it. But because of the data, we are able to support the private sector to go and do the improved cook stoves that some of the restaurants are able to do it. Overall, we have seen that the humanitarian system of free handouts has also been, like Owen said, a barrier to market development, and it prevents the other stakeholders like private sector to come freely on that side there. But generally, in these markets, two settlements, we have seen that there has been freely available and cheap informal cooking technologies, where the issue of standards is a problem. Whereas we aspire to develop markets through these approaches, still the issue of standards has to be taken so that sustainably the market can thrive very well. Otherwise, when we have low standard products being sold in the same market with the high ones, it also has a challenge on the other stakeholders as well. So limited access to finance, this has already been explained very well. Well, for our case here, much as refugees have access to other services, including free movement, still access by private sector to do their last mile distribution is not allowed yet, unless maybe you have to go through OPM and other stakeholders. This could as well also embed the demand and the supply in a way that it affects the supply chain. Limited awareness, as you can
Samuel?
see.
You have only 1 minute, please. You have only 1 minute remaining.
Yeah, so I'm actually ending. Yeah, generally we need targeted business development support for private sector, and the quality issues have to be taken, as well as for access to improve well on the areas of accessibility as well as adoption. Awareness campaigns, targeted awareness campaign must be taken into consideration. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ranisa.
Thank you. Let me quickly switch back to my screen. So thank you to both Natalie and Samuel. We have a lot of questions coming for you guys, so we will deal with those during the Q&A round. And since CASPIS intervention was a theme that was recurring in different presentations today, now I would like to invite our colleague Annika from Soberg from UNHCR, who is the senior CBI officer and has many years of experience with CASH program, and who is going to today talk about how CASPIS intervention is used for clean cooking. So Annika, over to you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you so much. I'm very humbled to be here amongst all these energy experts or cooking experts. Myself, I'm more into cash. So this will be a presentation from the cash perspective and the learnings we have done in the past 6 years when we have had our new policy. So we thought that we will just go through a little bit sort of what is UNHCR's direction on cash. Look at a little bit of post-distribution monitoring, and we had already a presentation for 2 countries, but we're doing this systematically in 79 countries, so some trends are quite interesting. Looking at the cooking intervention delivery options, a little bit on the market assessment and monitoring, cash for basic needs and winterization, and good practices on cash for energy. So we're looking at it a little bit broader perhaps than just sheer cooking. So maybe next slide, please. So our new policy is quite strong on cash. It basically says UNHCR will implement a why not cash approach, which means that cash takes priority over in-kind. We know that because we know that beneficiaries and the people we serve prefer cash as a modality. We know that it is efficient, and we know that they know how to prioritize their own needs. We also now have transfer mechanism in place in over 100 countries, meaning that people have access to financial services or financial assistance, at least, in most of the countries that we serve. We also know that in most places the markets work. 89% actually say, 84% actually say they know they can find what they need in the markets, for example. Another sort of strong policy direction is, of course, that cash is a tool for protection, and protection has been talked about already in terms of the cooking and access to cooking, but it's so much more as well for us, of course, protection, but also inclusions. We're talking about financial inclusion, we're talking about access to social protection, we're talking about right to work and livelihoods, etc., because cash can actually open up some of these opportunities. So maybe I'm not going to go through all of these things, but it was just to give you a big picture. So maybe next slide, thanks. This is just an overview of the cash we do. So we've gone from sort of 33 countries to 100 countries in 2021. What we do is we mostly do unrestricted cash. So we give cash for basic needs, and we let the refugees decide, and other persons of concern decide what to use the money for. We have reached some 34 million through 3.7 billion. And there were discussions already in this webinar on sort of, do they have access to financial services? And what we can see is that the cash that we deliver, 80% is actually delivered through bank accounts or mobile money accounts. I think we went from 3 countries where refugees had access to sort of self-owned bank accounts and mobile money accounts to 50 countries or something like this this year. So it's a huge improvement, and it also, of course, opens up opportunities for financial services, access to other financial services such as loans or other things. Next slide, please. So we have a corporate tool, our post-distribution monitoring tool, and we have sort of data from 76 countries now. And overall, 93%, this is sort of on a sample basis. So 93% of the interviewed households said that cash improved their living conditions. 92% reported a reduced feeling of stress, and 90% preferred cash for a combination as their assistance modality. We did see, which was also very clear from the previous presentations, that we are not meeting the basic needs. 73% actually reported that they meet half or less of the basic needs, which suggests a huge gap in just meeting basic needs. And 72% reported that they engage in negative coping strategies. So this could be, for example, begging or moving to a poorer shelter or taking your kids out of school and these kind of things. What is interesting then for you guys, I think, is the top 15 expenditures. So if you look at where firewood, fuel and gas comes in, it's very high up. It's just behind sort of health and clothes. So 23% reported that they use cash for this purpose. And also is relevant for energy that they also use, 22% reported that they use it for utilities and bills. Somebody said we don't prioritize cooking, in humanitarian assistance. It's maybe true, but refugees certainly do. And I think these figures are very clear on this. So maybe we go to next slide, please. So this is, I think, from our cash and energy compendium. And these are just sort of an overview of what the benefits and challenges and considerations can be. And I think much has already been said about this. But what I can say is that, we often include these costs in cash for basic needs. It's also part of our direction not to have sort of too many standalone programs with, costly monitoring with, we condition the cash, so they have to come back and show what they bought, or we give a voucher so they have to buy exactly that. It's not part of our direction. We believe that refugees can prioritize themselves, and therefore we often include costs for energy, including for cooking, in the basic needs grant. Next slide, please. The markets, of course, are very key, and much has already been said about that too. But we have a new multi-sectoral market assessment guidance and toolkit that we developed together with the Norwegian Refugee Council, and had a lot of other agencies and NGOs involved in the steering committee. It basically gives you what to look at, including for energy, but it's how do you assess services, how do you assess the goods, what are the important steps, and it's very simple guidance. We had one previous one, but that was very heavy, and we know now we don't want to collect too much data, we don't want to spend too much time and costly assessments, so it's sort of quick guidance on how you can do this. And it also includes monitoring, because market monitoring of prices, etc., is really standard practice of our cash interventions. And I think you can post, Alfred, if you're in the chat, you can post the policy and the things I've been talking about so far and the link to this guidance. Next slide, please. This is just an example. This was for utilities, but this is sort of how we view how cooking and energy can be sort of part of the minimum expenditure basket. So here is an example from Jordan, for example, and you can see that the utilities come under basic needs here. So otherwise you can see education, food security, health, livelihoods, etc. And then we just calculate sort of how much does this cost. And of course, this can also be then done in a more rural area if you talk about one of the cooking sources or solutions that have been presented and how much they cost. But ideally, this should be part of our sort of basic needs approach. Next slide, please. So we have some good practices. I think Kakuma was already mentioned as a good practice, but it is indeed very interesting to look at the figures. So this was actually exactly a cash for basic needs approach. We gave cash for basic needs. We targeted some 41,000 households with 2.9 million. And this was in the Kakuma refugee camps and Kalo Bay. So if we have people online, please come in and correct me if I'm wrong. Next slide, please. So you could see that the prioritization to purchase firewood and cooking fuel was super high. 82% said, yes, we use it for this purpose. And I think that is extremely interesting figure and shows that it's prioritized and it's really, really important need that refugees need to sort of meet. 89% felt that assistance is not adequate to meet the cooking energy needs. And this also, of course, links to, you know, the cash for basic needs. The figures that I showed, that 74% say that they can't meet half or less than the basic needs. So it is really a matter of prioritization. 71% indicated that the number of firewood charcoal traders had increased as below. And you can see it's the host community and the refugees. Next slide, Sam. So I'm just showing this. So this is a very small pilot from South Sudan. So we had the one from Kakuma, which is a cash for basic needs. And then we have this one, which is a project from Doro Camp in South Sudan. This is just a small little project focusing, targeting persons with specific needs, but with cash to meet energy needs, basically. So next slide, please. Here you can see that the results are quite interesting. Access to energy was improved by 90%, and 93% mentioned that cash have met half or more than all of the energy needs. So I guess we have many different approaches in UNHCR. We have the cash for basic needs, which is sort of a large part of what we do. But we also have these small pilot projects or other programs that have been presented already in this webinar that is more focused, dedicated on achieving outcomes in cooking, for example, through the use of cash. Maybe next one as well. This is just to show how much sort of funding goes into the cash. So this is cash for winterization. A large part of the winterization grant is, of course, used for electricity and bills and things that are needed in urban settings to cook and to do other things in the household. But you can see that the funding is massive, but yet we know through post-distribution monitoring that, you know, it's not enough to meet the basic needs. So maybe we just go to the first slide again, and I will wrap up. So I guess the key message here from the cash side is Cash works. We know that we are doing, $700 million a year in cash. We do a lot more cash than in kind. We know that refugees prefer cash. We know that markets come. If there is a cash flow, often markets come. Of course, the supply chain is really a key issue here, and I agree with our colleague from Uganda, but I think we can work on that. There's a lot of market-based interventions that we can do in terms of cooking. The transfer mechanisms are in place in these countries where we deliver cash. We have mostly digital transfer mechanisms, but also cash in hand in place. So in a country where you work and you want to do something on energy, you have to check first, do we deliver cash? Is there a transfer mechanism in place, etc.? And you will see that normally, yes, there is. I also said that, I said 84, but it's actually 86% said that they can find what they need in the markets, which also suggests that the markets are there in most of the time. And we also saw from the post-distribution monitoring that refugees know, just like you and I, how to prioritize their needs. What was interesting during COVID, for example, we saw a significant increase in the expense for wash, for example. So people went out buying soap, etc. So it's not as if we can sort of dictate what they use the money for. I think the key part for technical experts, which you all are, and I am not in this area, is to really monitor, right? You can monitor this. And we have been discussing with the energy team that, for example, in our post-distribution monitoring, we could add questions to monitor some of the things that you've been talking about in this webinar. That can inform the programming. That will also avoid doing sort of duplicative assessments, going into data collections that may not be needed, and even designing very complicated programs where it may not be sort of needed. So I guess those were sort of my concluding remarks, and thank you very much for inviting me, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Annika, and thank you to all our presenters. I'm going to quickly go back to the actual slide. So that concludes the first part of the webinar, where we had amazing presentations from a range of speakers. And from the questions that has been coming in, I can see there is so much of interest. So we will go through all of your questions. But before that, I have another poll question for you today. So today we talked about different types of market assessment. We talked about why it is important, what are the challenges of it. But what we didn't go into detail, which I want to ask you, the audience, is you as a project implementer, what do you think is the limiting factor for carrying out this assessment? I mean, we agreed today that we need to do it, but what are the limiting factors? Is it time frame? Is it budget? You can also choose the highest, like couple of the options which you think is the most limiting factor. So you can choose more than one options. So we want to get a feel for what do you, the audience, think is the limiting factor for carrying out these different kind of assessments or market needs and so on. So let's leave this the poll for another maybe 10-15 seconds so that we can have everyone's vote in. In the meantime, I would request all my speakers to be prepared for the Q&A round, where we are going to then dive into all the questions that haven't come in. And for our listeners, if you have questions and you haven't typed in, this is your chance. So please use the chat box to type in your questions. And do tell us to whom the questions is addressed to, because we have 4 different speakers today, so it will be easy for us to ask. So now I'll close the chat. I'll close the poll question and display the results. So we have astoundingly, let me just share the results so that you can see it. So perfect. Now it should be popping up on your screen. So we have amazingly 2 winners. So most of them, 66% says limited budget, and 54% said limited lack of tools or knowledge. Maybe if you choose lack of knowledge / tools, please do type in the chat. What do you refer to? Are you referring to lack of tools for doing surveys, questionnaire guidance, or just to expand on that a bit? So please do use the chat to tell us more about it. So while you are doing that, I'm gonna quickly ask all my panelists to switch on the camera so that we can begin with the Q&A round. And I must say, we have a lot of questions to go through today. So we're going to try to go through as much as possible. But I do see that some of the questions, they are also connecting with the theme of our next week's second webinar on 20th October. So in case we don't manage to do that, please do join us for the second webinar where we will try to address it. So maybe Anika, I start with you. So you as a CAS expert talked about the experience from a CAS perspective. So from your experience, what would be a role of an energy expert when they are designing a CBI intervention? What would you expect from an energy expert?
Yes, I would expect, I mean, when we implement cash, we do it in a multifunctional team normally, right? Because we were talking about lots of basic needs. For example, when we do a market assessment, if we are looking at cooking solutions, I am not the right person to assess whether, you know, solution 1 or solution 2 is the best one, right? Even if I speak to the refugees. So from the beginning, from the market assessment, the participatory assessment with refugees on these solutions, I think, you know, energy experts, if they are there, have to play a very leading role. I think also, of course, in the implementation and the monitoring, likewise, they need to be there. It also influences sort of our planning, right? So we do all these assessments so that we can plan our cash. So if we don't, for example, foresee these costs, maybe the cost for cooking in country X is very high, but we never really added them to the minimum expended basket. We never really took them into account. It happens. We forgot them. It's not that important. We looked at, you know, shelter and food and whatever. This is really important. This is where, you know, the expert have to come in and say, this costs this much, and you have to foresee it, right? And you have to include questions in the post-distribution monitoring on X, Y, and Z, because if it's not working well, we want to adjust our programming, right? So I would see that they play a very strong role in a multifunctional team that we normally use to plan and implement and monitor cash.
Thank you so much, Anika. So in the different question, one theme was very prominent, that was about inclusivity of the vulnerable groups without avoiding market distortion, because I think we didn't touch so much into market distortion, but it's a very prominent topic. So maybe this question goes out to Natalie, Owen, and Samuel. If you could think about how can we be inclusive so that we include the vulnerable population, the target population that we are tackling on using different methods or market approaches without actually distorting the market. For example, the voucher system, how do you also ensure that in the long term it does not distort the market in the different settlements that you are working in? And maybe for Anika, from the inclusivity side, maybe one thing that you could think about was you talk about all these digital solutions for cash-based transfer, but have you seen that there is also different so let me just rephrase that question. With the digital use like mobile banking for cash-based transfer, does it exclude the population who is not digital savvy? So how do you also include that both the population which is digital expert or savvy or not savvy is included? So maybe I start with Owen. I see some nodding heads. So do you want to kickstart?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's the $1 million question in this sector, right? I mean, this is what we're all trying to battle with. All of us who are thinking about market-based interventions are thinking of, you know, A, how do we get any market-based interventions to work really effectively, and then B, once you even get that working, then can you do something that's inclusive and captures the kind of vulnerable populations as well? And I mean, I don't have a silver bullet solution, but I guess, you know, some of the things that Anika has just been talking through are really important. You know, can you get a kind of base level of cash into the humanitarian system such that all people can afford to purchase a certain amount of cooking fuel from the market with choice, you know, and so have the ability to choose whether they're going to purchase wood or charcoal or something more advanced from a selection of choices on the market. There is something to be said about, yeah, just simply having that kind of base amount of cash in the system to enable that choice. And then after that, I mean, you know, typical things that the development sector is constantly engaged in, you know, how to provide access to microfinance, how to access to revolving loans, how to develop kind of community ownership of energy infrastructure, whether that's in cooking or otherwise. Other things that people are thinking about are kind of institutional supply of key kind of cooking ingredients, so whether in Ethiopia, for example, the supply of injera in schools and otherwise, like these are the types of things that we can think about to kind of target those at the more vulnerable level.
Thank you so much. Then over to you, Natalie.
Yeah, I mean, no one is saying that developing markets here is like the perfect solution. So it's for sure a system with a lot of drawbacks, challenges, and gaps also. But with the magnitude of a problem, in particular in the cooking energy sector, and the very minimal finance here that's available in the humanitarian sector for that, I think it's the only chance to at least serve some part of the population. With better technologies. Also, private sector at least is a bit famous for developing appropriate designs because they want to sell their products, which I only want to echo Owen. The humanitarian development space failed to do so far. There is no proper cooking energy system for off-grid areas so far. So maybe we're hoping that with involving and supporting the private sector, also the designs and technologies are getting better in that space. And I feel like one of the directions here to go is not to forget that markets will only serve those people who have access to finance or who have money to buy certain products and services, and will automatically leave out the rest. So it doesn't replace humanitarian assistance and humanitarian support. That, of course, still has to be there and has to be made sure that people who are the most vulnerable or who, for whatever reasons, cannot access products and services from these markets are still being served and not being left without cooking energy. And I think the art of that in displacement context is very intensive stakeholder engagement and not being competing with each other, like, but development is better or market-based is better, but no, humanitarian is better, but really work together with all the strengths that each system provides, and then create a system which is partly humanitarian, partly market-based, and at the end could serve everyone who's in need of cooking energy, which at the end is so vital because you have to cook the food that you eat, and we don't have to forget that. So everyone needs to be served better than it is now, and we have to work very closely together here from the different sectors.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And Samuel?
Indeed, refugee markets are really complicated. No one solution fits in all, because different categories of people there. For example, those vulnerable people, like people with special needs, I think they still need help, because based on their situation, they may not be able to buy these things that we're talking about at market price. So overall, I think it needs stakeholder engagement. We need to zone who really needs this, maybe humanitarian assistance. Otherwise, it's true that those categories of people need, and yet we need sustainable access of energy for this cooking. So basically, like Natalie said, it needs concerted effort from all the stakeholders. If we could engage and talk about who needs it, who doesn't need it, at what point, I think that would be a way forward for me to go with that. Yeah.
Perfect. Now over to you, Anika.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I mean, it's a very valid question, and we saw in the monitoring that we did during COVID in particular, that access and security to the cash actually decreased, because in many countries we took the opportunity to also advocate for access to financial services for refugees, because we said, look, cash in hand is no good for COVID. It's better to provide cash digitally. So we moved quicker than we had expected in some countries, for example, which also brought about some challenges. We didn't do the appropriate training, how to do mobile money, these kind of things. So we could see that it was harder for them. We have also done a project together with the World Food Programme, looking in 15 countries on sort of what are the challenges around digital cash for people. And of course, literacy, whether it's digital literacy, financial literacy, or numeric literacy, is a very big challenge. And we need to invest in this area for sure. Of course, persons with specific needs can also sometimes have difficulties in access, especially if they have sort of lost their social network that they had before displacement, right? Often, otherwise, community-based protection mechanism, will sort it out and help people. And also our protection programs, of course, we have data on persons with specific needs, how do they access assistance and these kind of things. We also see that working with the private sector is very different from working with, our partner NGOs with humanitarian principles and other. Private sector wants to maximize funding. They do not often understand, the humanitarian aspects of the work. There has been discrimination. Sometimes there are no contract in place. There could be sort of those kind of risks as well. But I think the key here is really to come up with context-specific solutions. We have done in many of these countries where we assess. We saw that digits don't work. They don't remember the PIN code. Okay, we have to have pictures or photos or things, other things, right? So you need to adapt the program. And I think we're doing this, and it also sort of contributes to development, right? It contributes to knowing how to use the mobile money, for example. So I think the vulnerable people, I just want to add that when we do cash, we don't do blanket cash. We really target those who are most socially, economically most vulnerable. That is our sort of basis. Then, of course, we could target persons with specific needs, with cash flow protection and other things. But so the ones that we are targeting are most of the time the most vulnerable from a socioeconomic perspective. And that also, brings about these challenges that I mentioned already. So when you design the cash, the protection team needs to be there and sort of put in place the mitigation measure from that people cannot access their cash, somebody took their cash or whatever. So I think maybe I stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Annika. Moving forward, we have a lot of questions for Samuel. So for the energy kiosk model, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just combine them. I'm going to throw them at you. So if you could give one-line short answers, that would be great. So the first question is, who is funding the energy kiosk? How is the private sector involved in it? How do you ensure quality products are sold in the kiosk? So how does the operation of the kiosk work? So if you could give me a very short answer for these 4 points, over to you.
Yes, with our energy kiosk model, it's our ESDS project that supports it. We give a basic startup kit to the groups who run it as a business, and it's a profit-making business where they get paid. They work with private sector. What happens here is the private sector technologies are either sold or they act as a vendor to sell and get commission. Operations, they have a manager who runs it as a business and has a team who do sales, marketing, all those things are there. It's just like a business. But I'm happy to maybe explain more details into this. My contact is there. They can ask me and I'll give them the different models as well. Thank you.
Maybe one last is, how do you ensure the quality of the products that's being sold via the energy kiosk? That quality is maintained in the products.
Okay.
You're muted, I think. We can't hear you.
Energy kiosk.
Samuel, I cannot hear you. I can see you are talking, but I cannot hear you. It seems like Samuel's audio is not working. Samuel? Samuel, I cannot hear you, but maybe I'll stop you for there because we are towards the end and I know we have only 1 minute before we close this webinar. We got a lot of questions. We can't answer all of them, but there were a lot of questions about the energy kiosk. So please do check out our first series where we also had a presentation on particularly energy kiosk. So maybe there you'll find a lot of answers. There were a lot of questions still addressed to Anika, Natalie, and Sam, Owen. So unfortunately, we cannot deal with all of those questions, but we will try to see if we can get it documented somehow. So with that, I think I have to close this Q&A round, although I have a lot of questions, but time pressure. So first of all, a huge thank you to all of you speakers. I think we had an amazing panel today. And the takeaways to quickly say is there is no silver bullet, although Natalie started her presentation with some silver bullets, but it's very much situation dependent. There's a lot of factors that can help you to a market approach, but there are also a lot of limiting factors. So as of now, maybe have a look at what is your local condition, what is the most favorable you can do, whether it can be a mixed method or more collaboration, more leaning towards market, less towards grant, and so on. But you will have to see that based on your socioeconomic assessments. And we have compiled a bit of like a bunch of resources for you where you can have access to have a look at and see what are the different components of the market, the one that Owen talked about, the paper that Owen talked about, all of those will be linked. So there is a dedicated page where we have tried to compile all of those resources. So please do have a look at it. And the webinar from today is also being documented there. And also do register for our second webinar, because I think a lot of the questions were also about demand and supply different interventions. And those we will dive in deeper in our second webinar on 20th October. So please do register for that. So with that, a huge thank you to all my presenters for your amazing presentation and lovely Q&A. A huge thank you to my audience for staying with us till the end. And I wish all of you a good afternoon and see you in our next webinar. Thank you and bye-bye.